Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. And today we are going to be looking at the On Point Aggregate 2.0. And this has been waiting for quite some time. You know, we've been waiting. Hold on, guys. My bad. I had my stream playing in the background. But I'm going to go ahead and just let this kind of settle in really quick. I'm going to let the chat load up on the side. But, obviously, if you guys are watching, make sure to, hit the like button and subscribe. If you're on Rumble or you haven't been on Rumble, make sure to follow on Rumble as well. That'll be great. And we are live on Rumble, X, and YouTube. So we're live on all three platforms as of right now. And I'm just going to wait for a couple people to tune in before we get started. And this is something that I'm really excited about, guys, because this is going to really put forth honesty, transparency, and effort into the polling industry. All right. This is something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now. And we finally have, we had the original version of the aggregate, which just had Trump's approval, had Vance's approval. It was just here and there. We had a couple things, but we released the 2.0 version of the aggregate, and there's a lot to cover here. And so before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, to subscribe to the channel. Make sure to follow on Rumble and follow on X as well. And what we'll go ahead now and do is we are pretty much going to be going ahead and looking at the pretty much the aggregate. So we have the following things here. We have the direction of the country. We have Biden's approval rating from his first term. We also have the 2024 presidential election national environment and some of the states. We have Trump's favorable rating, which is currently not added in yet. We are going to probably be adding that in about this week. And we have, the congressional ballot, and we also have the generic ballot as well for the midterms. So this is pretty much what we have so far. We're going to be adding a lot more to this as time goes on. But really, what we have here is about 439 polls spanning all the way back to 2017, where in the beginning of January, the aggregate actually had it about even, with 47% on the right track, 47% on the wrong track. And it kind of started moving, away from the positive direction from quite some time, to the point where it was negative minus 30 in 2017. And we start looking and we see, as January of 18 came, things were getting better. It was actually to the point where the wrong track in the middle of March was at 44%. And then it dipped all the way down when the coronavirus came. And then, of course, when the election happened, the right track, wrong track kind of went in the wrong direction. And it actually never really went in the positive direction. I mean, it did for quite some time, but it was still in the wrong track, right track. The wrong track was still really high, right? And we clearly see that as time has gone on, even at one point, it was minus 53 in 2022. And we see the second that Trump pretty much got sworn in, it closed the gap quite significantly. And as of now, on July, I believe the aggregate ends on the 10th here, it's only minus 3.6% in terms of wrong track, right track. And if we look at the aggregate, it's a lot of like Rasmussen polling for the most part. There's a couple of other polls that are in here, but it's really a lot of Rasmussen. Of course, we're going to be looking for, more polling and aggregation. But at least for the right track, wrong track, as of right now, we just kind of have Rasmussen's polling. And because, again, guys, this website only features certain pollsters. Like we've offered very little tolerance for error with some of the pollsters. And so there's only a select few in there. The next thing we're going to look at is Biden's approval rating from the last election or from the last term. And we see that, a lot of it is Rasmussen, some of it's Emerson, big data polls, here and there, Alice Intel, so there's some, polling here for the most part. but a lot of it is just accurate, pollsters from before. And what you'll actually see is that Biden's favorable rating was, give or take, it was net positive at one point. In the beginning of 2021, he was at about 50%, slightly above 50%, net favorable, but he was never at 60%, to 40% disapprove, like some people tried claiming. There was a lot of people that, said he was doing a lot better in his favorable rating. And I really don't see that being the case. And so, looking at the aggregate, once Afghanistan kind of happened, his approval rating really dipped quite significantly. And you pretty much see that it really, at this point, in 2022, it really plummeted, and it went all the way down to like basically a little bit below 40. And of course, you had pollsters that had him in the low 30s, high 20s. I don't really think that was accurate. And we clearly see, based on the sample, that it seems to be the case that his approval rating never really went in the mid 30s, like some pollsters tried to claim. His approval rating did actually improve in 2023. Even at one point, he ended up getting back to like a 47, 48% favorable rating in May. And once the lawfare hit President Trump, that's when his approval rating kind of tanked to an extent. And he hovered okay. And then once 2024 came, it was really just a disaster from there. And then the debate came, and that was really a whole bunch of problems. Now, interestingly enough, his approval rating actually didn't really budge much after the debate, which is quite interesting. And he actually finished off at about, give or take, a 43% approval rating nationwide. And he would have lost the election with that, obviously. That wouldn't have been great. But really, he was pretty much in a position to lose. By the election time, he was basically at 43% approval rating. So, and of course, looking at the features of this, you can kind of play around with, how smooth the lines are. You can kind of like customize the way the site looks, which is pretty cool. You can even play around with this example. So poll point density. So I believe it's like you can turn down certain, visual aspects of this. Line thickness is even editable as well, which is pretty cool. So you can kind of like play around with these settings for the most part. And you even see here just kind of like the zooming features, and you can kind of like really just, this is very editable. This is a very like editable interface, and you can even download the data sets in the new version. So that's also something that's really, really cool. And we clearly can go up. And then this is the big one. This is Trump's current approval rating. So if we look, the aggregate's updated as of July 18th. And we go down, and he is currently, give or take, if you actually look at this, he's pretty much sitting at a 0.4 net approval rating. And we clearly see here that if you go all the way back, Big Data Poll has a couple polls. Rasmussen polls very frequently, so that's why you see a lot of them. Trafalgar Insider Advantage is included. Quantus Insights is included. Fabrizio is also included on this website as well. So again, very little pollsters. TIPP, for the most part, was included just because they actually did really well at the end of the election cycle. So we still included them. Atlas is still in here because, again, we want to prioritize pollsters that did a decent job, in their ratings, but also we want to try to have a higher sample size. So that's also another thing that we like to factor in too. And we even see that there is a little bit of a weighting system here. And like even some of the past polls are still weighted into the aggregate because we have a certain methodology that the website developer uses in order to pretty much distribute the approval ratings evenly. We did not get to update the aggregate in time with the Atlas Intel poll that just came out today. So unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. But this is something, of course, that we're going to be, we're going to add that in. It'll probably end up shifting his favorable rating into the negative column. And he actually started out at like a really high point in his presidency. And for quite some time, he was positive like plus 12, plus 10. And he slowly came down. And especially after the tariffs, he kind of like started basically going back and forth between the positive and the negative favorables. And by May, he was already kind of recovering. And at one point in June, he was at like about 50 something percent. He was like net 4 points when you had a lot of the mainstream media saying that he was actually going to be down a bunch of points and stuff. Now, with like the Jeffrey Epstein and some of the messaging on the big, beautiful bill, now his approval rating is kind of narrowing up, but he's still sitting at 49% in our aggregate. So that's currently what we see right now. And if we even look here, we also have his first term approval ratings, where in fact he was actually net positive by quite a bit in his first term for the first couple weeks. And then he pretty much went net basically in the negatives for quite some time. But his approval rating was never really as bad as people were trying to make it out. Yes, in 2017, he did become pretty unpopular at one point. But in 2018, his favorable rating recovered. And it was even to the point where if you actually go to the midterms, you actually see that by November 2nd, November 5th, there's about a 48%, basically sitting at about 48% favorable rating. And even like Biden, for example, if you look at Biden's national approval rating in that term, if we actually go to the midterms in November, he was at about sitting at like 43, give or so. Like he is sitting at 43, 44 points. So again, just really interesting stuff here. And you can also filter by pollster. So clearly, we only have Rasmussen and Emerson included in some of these for now. We're going to be adding everybody else. And we even see here, like, of course, in the second, poll approval, we have a lot more polls. It's just that Rasmussen tends to poll like a lot. And so we kind of have like a rolling average included with some of them. So that is something that we're also going to be working on as time goes on. And then last but not least, we have the Trump's favorable rating is not included yet because, of course, the approval and the favorable ratings are different. This is what's really cool, okay? And actually, before we get into the 2024 stuff, I actually want to look at this. So this is the generic congressional ballot for the midterms. And if we see, there's really not a lot of polling here. Really not a lot. The aggregate was last updated on July 16th. I mean, Qantas has 5 polls, Big Data Poll has 2, Emerson 2, Rasmussen 1, and Atlas 1. And when you plug all of these in together, you pretty much see that the Democrats, for almost all of them, have been up, and only 2 had the Republicans ahead. And you still have the electorate pretty split for the most part. Like, you still have a lot of undecideds, but really, when the average basically settles in, you had at one point the Republicans tied in April, and then the Democrats kind of took the lead with a New York Times / College poll that came into the aggregate, and then the Republicans kind of tied it because you had a poll from Big Data Poll that had it up by 2, and his rating is pretty decent, so his rating was pretty good. And so it dragged the sample quite a bit. His sample size was a lot bigger, so it also takes a more priority in the aggregate. So, of course, right now, since there's not a lot of polling, the aggregates are going to kind of skew. And at one point in May, they were tied, and then the Democrats took the lead in the generic ballot by 5 points when Atlas dropped their poll. And as time has gone on, as things get weighted out, of course, the polling average gets smaller and smaller. And so Republicans have been kind of picking up steam, not necessarily picking up steam, but more so the Atlas outlier has kind of like flushed itself out. And of course, we didn't get to add that Atlas poll. So again, obviously the Democrats are going to take a much wider lead when we add the new Atlas polling that came out today. But as of right now, Republicans are sitting at about 42% and in the generic ballot, and Democrats at 43. So that's kind of what the generic ballot looks like. The Democrats are ahead as of right now. And what's really cool is we added this on purpose, where we actually went back to the 2024 election and used our methodology to actually update the aggregates. So what's really cool is we actually see it here where about 35 polls were included in the national aggregate. Okay, that's it. We had 13 from Rasmussen, 6 from Atlas, 6 from the New York Times, a couple from Big Data Poll, New York Times, Siena, and TIPP. These were the only pollsters that we pretty much included on here, and I believe we have to add SoCal's polling back. But the Big Data Poll is also in here as well. And what's really awesome is when you actually see the aggregate, Trump is up by 1.3% on the last day of the aggregate. The last day, he's up by 1.3%. And if you guys remember, he won the national popular vote by 1.5%, 1.4%. So it was basically statistically dead on, with even the percentages pretty much being on point, no pun intended. But they basically were accurate. And like obviously in July, you had Trump up 4 points, and then 3.5, 2 points. And then as time went on, the ballot kind of narrowed up, and then he kind of gained a little bit of a lead here. And then obviously the polling kind of tightened up. And then Harris took the lead with the New York Times Siena College poll. Harris took the lead for like a few days in October by like half a point. And then Trump kind of started building up his lead again, to being at a 1.3 percentage point win. And he was able to pretty much smoke her in the he was pretty much able to smoke her in the popular vote. But then what's really cool is we actually have the battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Wisconsin's, for whatever reason, is not here. I'm assuming that, I guess, Jay needs to add that back. But Pennsylvania, if we look at the aggregate, it started out with Trump plus 2 because Emerson College had that. Then the New York Times poll gets added. It kind of shifts. But overall, even though there's only 30 polls here, the picture is clear. It was pretty much a swing state. And really, it tied up here, and then Trump took the lead. And then once October passed, he kind of never really lost the lead. And for like a while, the last couple weeks, he was basically leading by a lot. And then the aggregate finishes at exactly 1.7%, which is literally what he won by in Pennsylvania. That is exactly the margin he won by in the state. So literally, the margin in Pennsylvania was basically dead on in this aggregate for 2024. And so we just went back to be able to actually show these, because we can clearly show that this methodology does work. Michigan, for example, had 29 polls. You see that Trump was ahead by a point, and then obviously in August you get more polling. And Harris for quite some time was up there. And then once September came around, as the debate kind of faded away, and more polling came in, she never really regained the lead in Michigan, and he just kind of kept doing better and better. And then at the end, he was basically ahead by half a point. So the average was about 0.9 percentage points off in Michigan, but pretty much the message is clear. He basically, the polling was about right. He was able to win Michigan by a somewhat close margin. He did a little bit better than the aggregate expected, but overall, like he did well, right? And then Wisconsin, when we had tested it, it was like really nice. It was actually really nice. North Carolina and Wisconsin aren't here. I'm assuming those are going to be added in a minor update that's coming up. Arizona comes in at Trump plus 3.1. So he wins it by 3.1% in the average. He never lost his lead in Arizona whatsoever. There was a point in September it was really close. And then after the debate, he basically kept expanding his lead. It kind of shrunk a little bit to a point. Our SoCal polling was there, got added at Harris plus 1, which was a terrible final poll. But for Arizona, at least, we did pretty well in the rest of the states. But really, even when that was added, it didn't really budge the average that much. And then at one point, he just kind of really took the lead after that, because you had the SoCal Strategies poll. We had Trump up 1 at that point. And then you had the New York Times poll come out at Trump plus 4, and that really boosted him up in the aggregate. And the way we weighted is there's like a certain way that the polls are weighted so that certain things are accounted for. And then Alice Intel as well. Not every single poll is actually displayed on here. So that's also another thing as well to keep in mind. Yeah, you see, look, when you actually look for like poll density, like you can clearly see that like the higher I scroll up on this, like the more it'll show. So like obviously the higher you scroll this up, the more polls actually gets shown. So if I put it at like the maximum setting, right? Like let's actually see this. I wonder what it would look like at the maximum setting. I believe I think it's about to finish loading. Yep. So at this point, yeah, you see all the final polls get added in. All of these like polls were basically coming in at Trump +4, Trump +3. So obviously he wasn't really going to be able to. Are you going to test it on future races? That's true test since you can't correct it retroactively. That's the true test since you can't correct it retroactively. Well, we're not really. Well, the problem is that we're not really like retrofitting it in a way where it's like tailored to make it accurate. We're just getting the pollsters that we believe are honest and transparent and had a low error rate in 2024, and we aggregate it a certain way, the same way that we started off with Trump's favorable rating and his approval rating, the same way we aggregate that. We use the same methodology on this 2024, these 2024 averages, and it just so happens to be that it gets all the swing states correct. That's what I'm trying to get at here. It's the same methodology that we're using for Trump's approval rating, and the same pollsters. He pretty much comes out with a victory in the electoral college. Um, Again, looking at Michigan, you see, look how close all this polling was back then. You had like all of these like really close polls at the end that kind of skewed the average in the wrong direction. But then if we look at, for example, Pennsylvania or no, Nevada. So this was really cool. He actually ends up winning Nevada in the average by 2 points, which is crazy because in the Real Clear Politics aggregate, just guys, I want to show you how like impressive this actually is, because I don't really think people understand that we've put a lot of work into this, and we want to actually like really show this for what it is. The polling average in Pennsylvania had Trump up by 0.4, and we had him up by the exact margin that he won by. Then if we look at Michigan, the polling average there had Harris up half a point. We had Trump up half a point. So we were a point more accurate than they were on that average. If we look at Wisconsin, the last time I looked at the average on the site before it was published, I believe we had Trump up by 0.6. So it was basically a statistically dead on poll, pretty much. And if you go to Georgia, it finishes off at Trump plus 1.9, and he won it by 2.2%. So like you literally cannot find better. Like that is a really good average for him in the state. And like Georgia, for example, our average was better. We were 0.6 percentage points more accurate than RCP was. Like pretty much if you look at all the averages, all of our averages were basically better. Even our Arizona average was slightly better than theirs because we have them up like 3.1. So it was basically about the same, but we still did better. And in Nevada, this was a crazy era. They had Trump up half a point and he won by 3. We had him up 2 in ours. So ours has much less of a polling error than his does. And by the way, just FYI, Harris never had the lead. I'm just putting this out there. Harris literally never had the lead in the state, like at all. She never had it. She never was ahead in Georgia against Donald Trump, according to our polling averages. There was a point where it was really close in September when not a lot of polling from the state was out, but really there just wasn't. He never led. Harris at one point was leading in Nevada, and then Trump kind of just took the lead in October, and it just expanded because you had a lot more polling to show for it. So that was another thing too. A lot more samples were introduced a lot later, and so of course, the more samples you have, the better, the more accurate we can be. And so we have them up 2 points on the final average. And then Pennsylvania, you have a bunch of polling in Pennsylvania. For the most part, you have like a bunch of polling there, but in reality, you can see that he basically finishes off. I mean, the average goes up to 2.2, but he basically finishes off in Pennsylvania at like the exact margin that he won by. There was a point in September where Harris was leading in Pennsylvania, and then Trump kind of took the lead. She tied with him, and then she never gained the lead back at that point. And even here, I would have said there's still too little polling to really decide, because at this point, there probably would have only been 10 polls in the aggregate. So once all of these came in, it was a lot more evident that he was going to end up winning it. So really, just to sum this up, basically in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, and Arizona, the margins are almost perfect. Arizona is the one, I believe, with the biggest error. And even then, we have them finishing off at 3.4% in Arizona. So this was the best aggregate you could possibly find. This was literally the best aggregate you could find out there for something like this. Like, we even had a better aggregate in Arizona than RCP did, at least retroactively speaking. But the same methodology that we used in 24 to aggregate the polling, we're going to use it in 26 and 28, and we're going to see how accurate it ends up being in the future. I feel pretty confident in these aggregations, and obviously there's not a lot of polls. There's not like 100 polls in each thing, but I'd rather it be 30 polls of really accurate pollsters than 100 polls of people that get it wrong all the time or that are always off 3 or more points, because then what does that average even mean? And just FYI, like, compared to 538, we were probably extremely superior compared to 538. Like, if they were around and we could look up their margins, like, it would be an embarrassment to look at those. The only ones that are missing from here are North Carolina and Wisconsin. I actually have to go ahead and see why that's the case. It'll probably get added in a slightly future update. But it is kind of interesting, because if you do look, there was a point where, like, in September, she did actually have a little bit of an advantage in the swing states. It seemed like even if you go to Arizona, I mean, she never really was ahead in Arizona either. Like, if you look, she was literally like never ahead in Arizona. She was basically never ahead in Georgia. She never really had the lead there at all. Um, she never really had the lead there. In Michigan, she did, and in Wisconsin, she did. So there was a point where she could have won 270 and been viable enough. And then here, she only really had a consistent lead on him for like a little bit, and that was only because there wasn't a lot of polling. But once some polling came in, from Fabrizio and Rasmussen, that's when, at that point, it was basically game over. And as, more and more polling got added in, at that point, his margin pretty much expanded to upwards of like 2 points. And that was basically it. That was pretty much it for him. And so, yeah, guys, that is the on-point aggregate. I know it says 3.0 here, but this is the 2.0 version of the aggregate. Again, we have the generic ballot for the midterms. We have the approval rating for the incumbent president at this time, and it is currently at a 0.5 point, positive net favorable. Biden as well, kind of sitting at a pretty similar pace. At his original term, he was always pretty much deeply unpopular. And so that is pretty much it, guys, for this update. I believe there will be a 2.1 update coming out like sometime soon. Like, it'll probably be this week. Does the star system change for the polls? Technically not. We have to add our like ranking system to the ones that we have on our site. So like, it'll kind of be like a curved bell. It'll kind of be like a curved where we basically are going to grade the A pollsters or the B pollsters within the A and B sections. So like, we basically got all the A and B pollsters, and we're going to have to grade them from A to F. So even though they're an F, they're really an A and B pollster on like RCP. But if they're an F pollster on here, it doesn't automatically mean they're a terrible pollster. It's just, I want the viewers to also know, like, okay, who was really, really like on the money. And a lot of them that are really, really on the money tend to be a lot more transparent than the ones that are kind of off by like a point or two, or off by a little bit more than that. And so this is really just to kind of provide a new aggregate for people to look at. that kind of takes away all of the mainstream bias. None of the fake news polls are in this aggregation. Very few polling is included in this. That's why the aggregates are a certain way. That's why, they're kind of retrofitted to be a certain way. But we really just picked pollsters that we trusted and we thought have done a decent job over the past 8 years. And we formulated a methodology and we basically just plugged everything in, and this is what we get. So we have not retrofitted anything to make all the, like for the 2024 race, like we didn't edit these by hand. We have all the data, and with the data that we had, we just applied it to the methodology that basically aggregated Trump's approval rating and different things, and we just applied it, and it just so happens to be when you plug all the polls into our methodology, you end up getting a better aggregate than most. So again, we are going to be doing this for the midterms. I don't know if we're going to be doing this for New Jersey and Virginia, because I don't know if Richard or Mark are going to be polling it. Like, I don't know. It just really depends on who polls it. I mean, if they do poll it at least twice or once or whatever, and there's like a couple polls we can add in, then I guess we will do aggregates for New Jersey and Virginia. But that's really it, guys. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And the website link is in the description down below for you guys to look at this. We are going to try to update this every single day, and we will see you guys in the next video.